So this is Majjhima Nikaya 150. To the Naga Vidins, some tribe of people.
Which one? 150?
50. 150. Thus have I heard on one occasion the Blessed One was wandering in the Kosalan country with a large sangha of bhikkhus and eventually arrived at this Kosalan village named Nagaravida. And so the Brahmin householders of that village heard that the Buddha had come and thought, now it is good to see such arahants. So they went to visit him. And when the Brahmins householders went to visit the Blessed One, some paid homage to him, others exchanged greetings, sat down, some extended their hands in salutation, some were silent, and so on. When they were seated, the Blessed One said to them, he addressed them, householders, if wanderers of other sects ask you thus, so other priests or other religious ascetics and so on, monks and that, householders, what kind of ascetics and Brahmins should not be honoured, respected, revered and venerated? You should answer them thus: those recluses and Brahmins who are not rid of lust, hate and delusion regarding forms cognizable by the eye, and so on for the other senses, whose minds are not inwardly peaceful and who conduct themselves now righteously, now unrighteously in body, speech and mind. Such recluses and Brahmins should not be honoured, respected, revered and venerated. Why is that? Because we ourselves are not rid of lust and hate and delusion regarding forms cognizable by the eye. Our minds are not inwardly peaceful and we conduct ourselves now righteously, now unrighteously in body, speech and mind.
Difference.
Since we do not see any higher righteous conduct on the part of those good recluses and Brahmins, they should not be honoured and respected, revered and venerated. So that's what the Buddha says they should, how they should regard things. But householders, if wanderers of other sects ask you thus, householders, what kind of recluses should be honoured, respected and revered? You should say, those recluses and Brahmins who are rid of lust, hate, delusion regarding forms cognizable by the eye, whose minds are inwardly peaceful and who conduct themselves righteously in body, speech and mind. Such recluses and Brahmins should be honoured, respected, revered and venerated. Why is that? Because we ourselves are not rid of lust, hate and delusion. Our minds are not inwardly peaceful and we conduct ourselves now righteously, now unrighteously in body, speech and mind. Since we see higher righteous conduct on the part of those good recluses and Brahmins, they should be honoured, respected and revered. And then he asks, householders, if wanderers of other sects ask you thus, but what are your reasons and what is your evidence regarding those venerable ones, whereby you say about them, surely these venerable ones are either rid of lust or are practising for the removal of lust. They are either rid of hate or are practising for the removal of hate. They are either rid of delusion or are practising for the removal of delusion. Being asked thus, you should answer those wanderers thus: it is because those venerable ones resort to remote jungle thicket resting places in the forest.
Right, they don't come and sit in the middle of the village waiting for guests and visitors and engagements and whatnot.
Just what would your proof be? Because you don't know those people.
Yeah.
So why would you assume that they are free of these things?
Well, if not free, then they're at least practicing for it.
Yeah.
Because the opposite of remote jungle dwellings is that which is founded in greed, aversion, delusion. People, inhabited areas,
Accessible.
Accessibility, obviously, to sensuality, to this, to greed, aversion, delusion. Maybe they're not seeking sensuality, not seeking anything based on aversion, but they're clearly seeking distraction. Why else would you come to people, to a village? Why would you? Like as you know, sort of take a resting place. So if you come for a purpose of alms rounds or something, but otherwise, why would you go into the inhabited area? There's absolutely no reason for it. And that there is a good criteria then that those who want to see what those people are practicing for can use. Oh, okay, so he prefers to stay in a remote dwelling in the forest with wild beasts than to come with people. Not because he has issues with people, he doesn't hate anyone, but that's what he finds restful.
When we see him, he's normal, like a normal guy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. Go and see him. Yeah, if he's a nutter or something, sure.
Yeah.
But no, in this case, as the criteria, as the Buddha says, no, he would prefer that. So the only two reasons why somebody would prefer remote, and I mean like remote. I don't mean like you go and stay in a monastery or a little temple or something, because that's not remote. That's still among people. Even if you get your own room, you're still crowded by people. Even if nobody comes to your room, you're still with people. So if somebody goes and stays in the wilderness, that person would prefer that for two reasons, as the Buddha said. One, they're already either free from greed, aversion, delusion, or they're practicing for it. Which means non-solitude is directly contradictory for practice of freedom from greed, aversion, delusion. It's incompatible with it. So if somebody says, oh yes, I'm practicing from greed, aversion, delusion, and lives surrounded by 20, 30 other people, and most of the day spends in the community of people, they're not practicing for that. No matter what they think, they're not practicing for freedom from greed, aversion, delusion. Because for that, solitary base is necessary. Like when most of the day you're actually alone, literally alone, and maybe once or twice a day you come together for whatever purpose, whether it's Pindapat or some meeting or something, but most of the time you're alone. And not for a week or 2 weeks. I mean, even that's better than nothing. But no, that's your mode of living that you prefer.
Because as householders, they would say, well, how is this ascetic living? Well, he lives in a very good house, a mansion, a palace. He's surrounded by 10, 20, 30 people.
Sure. Many of whom act like servants.
Yeah, he's got many duties.
Many engagements.
So, but he does live in harmony with all those people, just like I wish to do in my community,
sure,
in my village.
Sure.
I too would like a big house. I too would like to have all sorts of food available for me.
Sure.
A buffet, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So this ascetic is living the life that I want to live as a householder.
Yeah,
Therefore,
so that's the thing. Like then you realize that they're the only. At most, it's a slight upgrade to a household life. Say like a commune life, spiritual commune, or whatever you want to call it. It's a slight upgrade because, well, it would be a slight upgrade if, say, they were to keep the rules, keep the 8 precepts. So it's a slight upgrade to a household life because of the 8 precepts. But it's not a necessity. As in, a householder can start keeping the 8 precepts, and you already met that. So that's what it means that if you kind of review and see, like, well, actually, no, I sometimes do that, sometimes I don't.
Yeah, sometimes I do. Now righteously, now
exactly. So now I can. If I were only to do the pre, then there wouldn't be a difference between me and this commune that I venerate. It just wouldn't.
Yeah.
Because there is no higher distinction. Everything else, and then in many other regards, it's actually easier than my life.
Yeah.
So what if I were to then keep the precepts, and I would have a relatively easier life? But of course, many people would not trade that. Many people are afraid to be celibate and so on. But that's just the state of the human mind at the present age. But the point is, you need to recognize, okay, so it's a slight improvement just because I'm so bad, as in I can't even keep the 5 precepts or 8 precepts.
But sometimes I do.
Sometimes I do, which means okay. So and yeah, sure enough, these people in the commune, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they leave, sometimes they come back. So what's the non-worldly distinction except the circumstances? And there would be freedom from greed, aversion, delusion. There would be practicing nibbana and practicing towards nibbana. And again, So how would you set that criteria? How do those people in commune live? If it's a commune, means it's a community, means they don't live, there is no seclusion. Or seclusion is relative to the coming together. Mostly it's about coming together. Occasionally you get time off. But again, that's like a household's life. Well, occasionally, you know, I earn well, now I can go and afford a 10-day holiday on my own, or a retreat or whatever. So if a household had to review his situation, he says, well, this is not a massive improvement. It's not going to result in freedom from greed, aversion, delusion, because there is no solitude, there is no physical solitude, there is no remoteness, there is no, literally, that being alone most of the time. And it's not incidental, because being alone is the hardest thing to do for a Putujana. That's why the Buddha says you have to develop wisdom in order to start finding pleasure in solitude. Otherwise, it's going to be painful. And that's the whole point. That's why the neutral feeling, if it's unknown, if it's not understood, it's unpleasant. And that's the definition of boredom. It starts neutral, but you don't understand it, you don't understand the feeling, you want something, whatever, your craving is there, means that neutral feeling is going to be very unpleasant. Very unpleasant if you stay with it. And that's why, so, and see, that's the problem that I would often kind of go back to when I describe these things, like with these group retreats, organized retreats, where people are perfectly silent, nothing, no engagement, no distraction, but you're still with other people, and then your meditation technique becomes something you do, something you perform, so you're not alone. Being alone means having nothing to do, or very little to do throughout the day, except sit with yourself, and with your own thoughts, and with your own feelings. So it's not incidental that all the Putujana's effort revolve around avoiding this. Even the Putujanas who committed to practicing Buddhist teaching, yet live in massive communes, constantly frequenting people, constantly spending time with people, coming together in the morning, coming together in the afternoon, coming together in the evening.
Duties.
Loads of duties, loads of stuff to do. Or go for retreats where I must do step 1, step 2, step 3, watching, moving, breathing. I must do this, I must do this. Because if I stop doing anything, I will start sinking. And that's why people are terrified of solitude. Even those who go and seek solitude, they then have to find something they must do in it, so they don't sink in that solitude. And for as long as you rely on such efforts, you are not the one that's delighting and finding joy in solitude. So that's why you have to stop doing that, take the hit of anxiety or whatever else, even at the risk of going mad. It's just, as the Buddha said, sometimes samanas and brahmanas, they set off to swim correctly to the other shore, but then they drown. So you want to prepare yourself with your virtue. That's what the Buddha said, don't go to a forest unless your virtue has been properly developed, the teaching has been understood, and so on. But then that doesn't mean like, okay, so I feel justified in not seeking seclusion because I still haven't developed it. Well, what are you waiting for? It's on you either way. And everything is summed up in that little passage that probably many people would have just read, okay, of course, yeah. But it's like, no, review again what the Buddha says there. That kind of dwelling means freedom from greed, aversion, delusion, or practice towards it. Absence of that kind of dwelling means not practicing for freedom from greed, aversion, delusion. No matter what you put on your poster and the advertisement of your place and whatnot. So, and another, again, important thing is, so even people who do go and seek seclusion, then they have to resist that inner kind of impulse to find the work inwardly. As I must go through this, I must meditate on this. And then the meditation technique becomes a form of distraction from being alone with themselves.
Thoughts cognizable by the mind.
Yeah. Shut my thinking, or focus on this, focus on this, get experience. No, you want to be you in that solitude and start feeling that solitude basically swallowing you, threatening you. That's why virtue is not negotiable. You need to develop virtue beforehand, because then you can take it. You can take that threat, because it's only a threat. Nothing can happen to you unless you choose to do it. That's like a definition how basically how people would do things and breakdown and
You
madness.
see the danger, you see the
Pressure,
safety.
pressure, but nothing can be done to you unless things you choose to do with yourself on account of that pressure, on account of that fear. And that's that sutta, the fear and dread, where the Buddha would go in these remote, dangerous dwellings with like tigers and whatnot, and doing walking meditation at night. And he said, "What if while I were walking back and forth, pondering on the Dhamma, a fear would arise because he heard something in the bushes. He wouldn't change the posture until the fear is dispelled." That's exactly what I'm talking about. He wouldn't do anything on account of the arisen fear. Until the fear is dispelled, then whatever he does won't be rooted in trying to avoid the fear. So that's what I mean. You can't go mad unless you give into. You can't do anything unwholesome unless you give into. The pressure can't do anything to you unless you let it. Unless you choose to allow it. So the Buddha wouldn't do until this disappears, so that it doesn't become, this was letting in the pressure, letting in the fear. Then if he were seated or standing while the fear arose, he would not change the posture, means his basis of his situation would not change, he would not do anything significant until the fear is dispelled or subsides, and then he would do it, just to make sure that it's not rooted in trying to avoid it. But all these things will become apparent for the one who goes and starts, seeking solitude. If they're not ready for it, then every single effort should be towards preparation for it. Virtue, restraint, knowledge of the teachings. And then, okay, so I'm in solitude. What must I do? That's what you should do. Nothing. Abide in non-activity and start emulating it, and start seeing yourself as completely circumstantial and so on. And you get used to it. If you don't break down, if you don't break the precepts, if you don't run away with fear, if you don't suddenly jump on a view and say, no, this is a mistake, you should go and be with people, people are good. Basically, if you don't give in any shape or form, you will get used to it. And then you'll start to see it. And that's what the Buddha said in that other sutta. So that's the other sutta where it says, a monk who is basically living in the company, living in the commune, so to speak, living with others, and he obviously values it, finds it peaceful, finds it delightful, finds it contentful to live like that, that he will develop a pleasure of seclusion. That's not possible. And for the monk who lives in the company, who because of that cannot develop pleasure of seclusion, that he will then develop sign of his mind, discern the sign of the mind, that's impossible. The one who cannot discern the sign of the mind because he doesn't live in seclusion, because he delights in company, that he will then develop the right view, that's impossible. And then without the right view to know basically what Dhamma is, that's impossible. Without knowing what Dhamma is to develop Nibbana, that's also impossible. All because he delights in company, all because he's never dealt with his personal solitude for himself. And I don't mean he pushed himself for 10 days, not talking to her, not seeing anybody, no, actually found the joy in it and start preferring it, not done it as a novelty, kind of little to wind himself up or something like some intense retreat. No, actually found the joy in it and then starts to prefer it. And in order for a person to do that, they need to go through that layer of anxiety and fear of being alone without having anything to do and so on. But that is that gateway. If somebody does that, then they'll start finding the pleasure in solitude. If somebody starts finding pleasure in solitude, they'll start to discern the peripheral signs of their own mind as a phenomenon, not their own doing. If one starts discerning the peripheral signs of their own mind, he can then develop the right view and become a sotapatti. Because he knows, that's where the practice is. That's where the suttas apply. That's where all the things the Buddha talks about should be discerned. He sees the area where he sees the domain basically of it. But without going through that personal terror of anxiety, of boredom, to arrive at it, that's not possible. And all of that is rooted in company or rooted in seclusion. Hence such a categorical criteria. If they seek such dwellings, they're either like that or practicing for the freedom of that. If they don't, they're not like that and not practicing for the freedom from that.
Yeah, I'll say it again.
So even the Sotapattis, who were like lay people back in the day, they dealt with that personal existential pressure of solitude, boredom, without resorting to a meditation technique, without resorting to a wrong view, without resorting to company, without resorting to distraction. They dealt with it, they seen it, they understood it. Then they chose maybe to not practice and went back because they had duties for the lay life, but that's a completely different topic that can be discussed elsewhere. But even they're not like he was in the middle of his sort of household life and suddenly dawned on him. No, they dealt with it. You don't hear about it in the suttas, but you hear about it there, where the Buddha talks about the right view. What's necessary is seclusion. What's necessary is non-delighting in
That's
company.
also why it's I read a question that does a sotapanna fear death? And I'll say no, because his right view involves understanding death.
Exactly.
But he fears the dying.
That's what I talk about, that existential anxiety of boredom and being alone. That's what death is.
Mm.
That's why people are terrified of death, because that's why people are terrified of boredom as well. They start losing their mind. Normal people, perfectly functional people, you lock them alone without any, or put them in some remote dwelling with like on their own.
Even if
that's exactly why, because that's where the beginning is. Understanding that nature of that, which is understanding the nature of death, understanding the nature of neutral feeling, the delighting in solitude. It's all the same thing. Hence Sotapanna, that's why he often said, if he doesn't become an arhat, he might become in the moment of death. Because the direction of death is the direction of the right view. It's the direction of dispassion, disenchantment, letting go. It's the direction of Nibbana. That's why Putujana fears Nibbana. From Putujana point of view, Nibbana is closer to death than to what Putujana thinks Nibbana is. Because the true peace, true absence of suffering, is when you have relinquished your life, while you're still alive.
But it's the dying part. So
the
pains.
Death for somebody who hasn't understood death is death.
Yeah.
But you understood death means you're not subject to death. That's why for an arhat the word death is never used in the suttas. It was used like his aggregates would break apart. That's why many of people who come and hear the Buddha would like get like shocked, terror, and anxiety, and figuratively start pulling their hair, or maybe literally fall on the ground, beat their breast, or they will kill us. Your teaching will destroy me. Because from somebody who is not relinquishing the self-view, what the Buddha teaches is the destruction of the self-view. Obviously through extinguishment, not through the actual destruction of it, because it was a mistake to begin with. But Putujana doesn't know that. So for him Nibbana is death, basically. When he sees it, he fears it. And that's why that solitude, the Buddha said, you need to gain wisdom, first restraint, sense restraint, virtue, and then wisdom to start finding solitude pleasurable correctly. Because it comes out of their wisdom. It's completely opposite of your entire experience of Putujana. Going with the senses, going with the grain.
Let's go back to that. Why they should think that someone's worthy of respect and honor. It is because those venerable ones resort to remote jungle resting places in the forest, uninhabited forests. For there are no forms cognizable by the eye there of a kind that they could look at and delight in. There are no sounds cognizable by the ear there of a kind that they could listen to and delight in, or smells, or tastes, or touches of a kind that they could touch and delight in. These are our reasons. This is our evidence whereby we say about those venerable ones, surely these venerable ones are either rid of lust, hate and delusion, or practicing for the removal.
See how much is contained in that little sutta, in that little few lines. That, okay, of course, everybody, you just read over it, of course, Yet the entire existential dread and suffering, need for company, need for something to do, dependence on something to keep you floating so you don't sink in yourself, it's all in there. And that's exactly what that criteria is rooted in. If the person is in the environment that supports that, he's not practicing for freedom from it. If the person is in the environment that doesn't support any distraction, any sensuality, any things that you could delight in, then he's practicing for it, because otherwise he wouldn't be spending time in that area. He would go mad. He would leave. He wouldn't. But yet he's there, full of joy. So a person needs to learn how to be alone with oneself. Overcome the anxiety that comes from it, the pressure of boredom, the fear, not do anything to compromise the virtue. And then the signs of the mind will begin to manifest. And then you can develop a right view. Nothing else. There's no other gateway, by the way. It's not like, oh, there's just one way. When the Buddha said the reason for the right view is the presence of the sign of the mind, discern sign of the mind. So the sign of the mind can be discerned without having went through that existential solitude. That's impossible.
Some might say, well, that's the introvert's way, but there's the extrovert's way of
which
practice.
is the Putuja's way.
The path of community, production of things, duties.
I mean, the Buddha told of a noble Sangha, basically. Ananda was there, probably Arahants. You know, he wasn't just with random villagers. He was a group of monks, probably many of them already enlightened, or at least sotapannas. And they were sewing robes for the katina, and discussing and doing things, preparing. And the Buddha walked in and said, what is this noise? What is this crowd here? And he says, oh, well, Lord, we are sewing our robes for the katina, which is the auspicious occasion. And he said, well, I thought it was like a band of fishermen selling their product on the market. And then he told them off for just dwelling in company, even for seemingly good reason, to Arahants. So if Arahants and noble Sangha was reprimanded for dwelling in company, what is to be said of Putujanas? Because they could still theoretically, in that company, once you get the right view, you could still theoretically, obviously much slower, you will progress much slower. But you still could progress because you got the criteria, you went through that existential solitude. But let alone those who never even start, who from the start say, no, that's a wrong direction to go, you must stay together. And that's exactly why they stay together. That's the whole emphasis on the commune and the group and group this and group this, so people will not sink in themselves. But without the risk of sinking, how can you learn to swim? Without learning to swim, how can you cross the shore? That's simply not possible. So yeah, the risk of sinking is real. But then, the rewards of crossing the shore are equally real, as in insurmountable. So, is the fear of sinking going to prevent you from ever trying to practice correctly?
You're already sinking, kind of.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. Exactly. You ask yourself, well, okay, I might not try to swim because I might sink, but what's the alternative? I'll stay on this shore. I'll drown anyway. Yeah. So really, you don't really have much to lose. Mm-hmm. Of course, you don't want to be foolish about it. As I said, virtue needs to be developed before. As the Buddha said himself, that you go to the forest dwellings and remote and be physically secluded.
Don't just try and jump to
no,
seclusion.
Okay, yeah, now suddenly shut everything down, lock and just run into the mountains. Well, you're not going to survive. But not seeing that is your task, well, that's probably the worst view you can have. No, I don't need to. No, this is fine. And then stay surrounded with 50 people. Whether as a householder or a slightly upgraded householder in a commune.